Hi there, this is Solitary Ronin Films, and welcome to another episode of Double Take. And today's episode is about killing Hitler. This is Fritz Lang's 1941 film, Manhunt, and Clive Donner's 1976 film, Rogue Male. Now, both these films are based on the same book, Rogue Male, by Geoffrey Household, which is a bit of an odd name, and it's about a rich Englishman who is hunting in Germany in early 1939 and does a sporting stalk of Hitler. So he just playfully points his rifle at Hitler and pulls the trigger, but there's no bullet in it. And then just for fun, he puts a bullet in it, and he is discovered, and he misses Hitler. But obviously he wasn't intending to kill Hitler. But obviously the Germans get a hold of him, torture him to see whether he was sent by the British, and try to dispose of him by throwing him off a cliff. He survives, goes back to England, but the Germans follow him and obviously try and kill him. Now, both these films follow the same story, the slight differences. Manhunt from 1941 was one of Fritz Lang's earliest Hollywood films, and it stars Walter Pidgeon and George Sanders. As anybody knows, I just absolutely love George Sanders. So he plays the Nazi who's chasing him, and also features Joan Bennett, who would feature in a few Fritz Lang films, as an East End Cockney girl whose accent's a little bit wobbly. And it also stars Roddy McDowall as a cabin boy. This is the Blu-ray DVD release. It has a 21-minute documentary on Fritz Lang and Hollywood's anti-Nazi films. And then there's a documentary by Joan Bennett's great-granddaughter, for half an hour. There's a commentary and there's a making of. So this is a 1941 film. Now, Rogue Male, this is the BFI dual release, which has just been out this week or last week. This was a BBC film from 1976, which stars Peter O'Toole, and there's various faces that you'll recognise. Alistair Sim plays Peter O'Toole's uncle in it, who's in the cabinet at the time. This must have been Alistair Sim's last film, or certainly one of his last films. Peter O'Toole at the time was coming off of pancreatic cancer, so he wasn't drinking. So he was in one of his more, I wouldn't say stable parts of his career, but and he just gives a fantastic performance. But that's an aside. Yeah, you'll recognise Hitler in Rogue Male, is played by the headmaster of Grange Hill, if anybody is familiar with the British kids school series. And there's lots of, Maureen Lipman makes a small appearance. There's lots of kind of famous British actors in it. The special features on this are quite odd, wide-ranging, idiosyncratic maybe. There's a 72-minute lecture with the writer of the screenplay, Frederick Raphael. There's a newer interview from 2014 from Raphael. There's an audio commentary by the director, an audio interview with the director for 15 minutes. There's actually Eva Braun home videos or home films that she shot. Loosely, the setting in the film is the same kind of Bavarian country residence. And there's also a newsreel footage from 1937 of the British Union of Fascists march in London, which is kind of interesting. And 1 minute footage from 1921 of a foxhound pack. And there's an illustrated booklet. So it's a somewhat eccentric bunch of extras on this one. I should also say Harold Pinter makes an appearance as Peter O'Toole's lawyer in Rogue Male. So let's start with Manhunt. Now, granted, I'm biased because George Sanders is in it, and George Sanders is just fantastic. There's something about the fact that it was made in 1941, so we're 2 years into World War II, even though it's set before World War II, just before World War II. And when he's lining up the shot at the start, you do kind of get a strong sense of shouting at the screen, pull the trigger. I don't know why, it's just, you get this bizarre feeling. You know, it was shot, pardon the pun, while Hitler was obviously still alive. Also, American audiences, America hadn't joined the war yet. But if it was shown in Britain, it would be like, pull the trigger, pull the trigger. So that has an odd quality that the 1976 one doesn't have, because obviously it's 30 years after the war, so it doesn't have that immediacy. There's kind of elements of both films that I like, and then there's little things in both of the films that I don't like. So if they could have merged, so for example, I'm not the biggest fan of Walter Pidgeon in it. It would have been fantastic if somehow Peter O'Toole and George Sanders would have been in the same film. That would just be absolutely awesome. Manhunt hangs together better. Granted, the kind of the plot point of when he comes back to England, he has to go to ground essentially, like an animal. So he kind of goes out to the country and hides in the country. And that's kind of handled a bit better, and the whole kind of film is kind of structured a little bit tighter in Fritz Lang's version. But maybe because that's Fritz Lang. It's not Fritz Lang's best film, obviously, by a big margin, but it is a fascinating early Fritz Lang film. And again, you get George Sanders and you get a plot to kill Hitler. Well, it's not really a plot to kill Hitler, because again, it's a sporting stock. It's just for the fun to see if he could do it. I'm not going to talk about spoilers later in the film. You can watch, well, one of them and you'll find out, or watch both of them for a comparison. Rogue Male is interesting. It does away with the kind of one German baddie throughout. I mean, George Sanders kind of disappears for a wee while and then comes back. But in Rogue Male, you have a German Gestapo officer at the start who's torturing him. The torture scenes are really well done because you don't actually see anything, but it's just Peter O'Toole's face and Peter O'Toole's reactions that you imagine you've kind of seen the torture, and you can imagine the torture's rather nasty. So it's obviously a bit more explicit than Manhunt, obviously, but you still don't actually see it because it's off camera. I mean, this is a BBC production, so it doesn't have the biggest budget in the world, so that's maybe one of the reasons why they didn't show it. And obviously it's 1976, so it wasn't quite the kind of gore levels you would have now if they made it, because he does get his fingernails pulled off, but again we don't see it, we just see his face and then the kind of scars that are left by his torture. But I can't say enough about how great a performance Peter O'Toole gives, because obviously by this time in his career he's been through a lot. He's been through a lot in his life at this point. And there's a point later in the film when he's hiding out and the Germans do something which upsets him. It is actually quite moving, and he does give a fantastic performance in this. So one of the issues with Rogue Male is they don't have that singular baddie that kind of goes through the whole thing. So you have the Gestapo officer at the start, and then you have somebody else who's trailing him in England. So that's not quite as good, and it's obviously not quite as good because it's not George Sanders. The script for Rogue Male is just fantastic. There's so many great one-liners about class and about, you know, rules, and about, you know, it's just not cricket and stuff like that. But I prefer the way Rogue Male does the kind of romantic angle, because it's shown in flashbacks and in dreams that Peter O'Toole's character has about this woman that he had an affair with and what happened to her. Whereas in Manhunt they go for a more conventional romantic angle, even though Walter Pidgeon's not as interested as Joan Bennett is. When the East End girl helps him round London because it's parts of London that he's not familiar with. So that's more a kind of conventional romantic kind of plot structure. But I actually prefer how Rogue Male does it. There's just something about Manhunt, because it was made in 1941 and it's about killing Hitler while he was still actually alive, just kind of elevates Manhunt above Rogue Male, even though there's so much good stuff in Rogue Male. But again, like I say, it maybe doesn't hang together as well as Manhunt, but maybe that's just the kind of difference between the directors. But they're both fascinating little films. Both fascinating kind of in the subject matter. Again, it's that whole thing of killing one to save millions. and they're just really well acted for the most part. Little World War II films. So thank you very much for watching. Let me know if you've seen these two films. Let me know which you prefer. And hopefully we'll see you again. Thank you very much for watching. This is Solomon saying farewell.